My name is Darnell Harris, and these streets raised me long before I even understood what that meant. I was born and raised in the kind of neighborhood people cross the street to avoid, the kind they point to on TV when they want to show what struggle looks like. But for me, it wasn't a headline, it wasn't some story to scare outsiders. It was my everyday life. It was cracked sidewalks under my sneakers, the smell of fried chicken mixed with gasoline at the corner gas station, the broken sound of music leaking from beat-up cars with speakers louder than their engines. Our building was an old brick complex with faded paint and busted mailboxes. The hallways smelled of damp carpet, fried food, and sometimes the sharp sting of bleach when someone tried to scrub away what couldn't really be cleaned. Roaches moved like they paid rent, slipping under doors and crawling across kitchen counters when the lights came on. Neighbors yelled through thin walls, sometimes fighting, sometimes laughing, sometimes both in the same night. I grew up surrounded by people who were just trying to survive. Miss Evelyn from 3B sold plates of food on Fridays, fried fish, collard greens, cornbread, just to cover her light bill. Mr. Charles, the old man who sat on the front stoop every morning with a cane across his knees, used to tell us about the jobs that used to exist in factories that were long gone. Kids ran the hallways barefoot, their faces sticky from corner store candy. The barbershop down the block doubled as a therapy session for men who couldn't afford therapy, where you heard everything from heartbreak to hustling plans while the clippers buzzed. The corner store was the heartbeat of our block. A bulletproof glass window separated us from the man behind the counter, and the fluorescent lights hummed louder than the voices inside. $1 meant you had options: chips, a honey bun, a quarter juice, maybe some loose candy if the owner was in a good mood. The older kids posted up outside, leaning against the wall, watching everyone who came in and out. You had to learn early how to keep your eyes forward, how to walk like you belonged, how not to show fear even if you felt it deep in your chest. At night, sirens sang like background music. They started far away, then came closer, filling the air with blue and red flashes bouncing off our walls. Some nights they stopped on our block, and I'd hear footsteps pounding down stairwells, radios crackling, doors being kicked in. Other nights they just passed by, chasing someone else in another part of the city. To me, sirens were like the lullabies nobody sang in our homes. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, listening until they faded, wondering if the sound meant someone I knew was gone for good. School was supposed to be the way out, but it never looked like opportunity. The desks were scarred with carved initials, and half the textbooks were missing covers. The heat barely worked in the winter, so we sat with our coats on, trying to write with stiff fingers. Summers were worse, the classrooms baked under the sun, and sweat dripped onto notebook pages while teachers tried to shout over the noise of fans that barely moved air. Some kids disappeared halfway through the year, swallowed by the streets. Their faces ended up painted on murals, names printed on T-shirts, their stories told in whispers that faded too fast. I saw life in my neighborhood through small details. The basketball court with its rusted rims and cracked pavement felt like a place where time stopped. Out there, none of the weight mattered. It was just the sound of sneakers squeaking and the ball hitting the pavement. On summer nights, the smell of barbecue smoke drifted through the air, even if it came from a beat-up grill sitting on a patch of dirt behind our building. Graffiti covered the walls like scripture, names of the fallen written in bright colors, dreams sprayed on bricks that the city called vandalism, but we called memory. Being black in America meant I carried a story on my skin before I opened my mouth. The cops patrolling our block never looked at us like kids. We were suspects before we were anything else. I learned how to move slow when they drove by, how to show my hands when they stopped, how to survive moments where one wrong move could change everything. Store owners watched us harder than they watched their shelves. Women clutched their bags tighter when we walked by, even if we were just coming home from school. The world outside our block already decided who we were, and most of the time, it wasn't who we knew ourselves to be. But those streets weren't only pain, they carried joy too, even if it came in short bursts, like the sound of old-school R&B blasting from a neighbor's window on a Saturday morning, or kids running through open fire hydrants in the summer heat, their laughter rising above the spray of water. Or the way everyone came together when tragedy hit, passing around collection plates to help a family pay for a funeral, cooking meals for someone who'd lost everything. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and sometimes that was the only wealth we knew. I spent hours on the roof of our building looking out at the skyline. The city stretched wide with glittering towers that looked like another world. From up there I could almost forget the trash cans overflowing in the alley below, the rats darting between shadows, the arguments echoing from windows. I could almost believe there was more for me than what I'd been given. But then the wind would carry the sound of sirens again, pulling me back to the reality that escape wasn't as simple as looking at a different horizon. These streets didn't just raise me, they shaped me. They carved lessons into me the way rain carves into stone. They taught me how to watch people, how to sense danger before it arrived, how to hold on to hope even when everything around me said, let it go. They taught me that life can be cruel and beautiful at the same time. And no matter how far I go, no matter what tomorrow brings, these streets will always be in me, for better or for worse. The morning of my brother's wedding came heavy, like a storm that had no rain. I woke up early without meaning to. The sun pushed through the thin blinds of my bedroom, stripes of light cutting across the wall. But instead of warmth, it only made the room look smaller, emptier. I lay there staring at the ceiling, already knowing what the day held for everyone else and what it didn't hold for me. Somewhere across town, my brother was probably buttoning a crisp white shirt, sliding into polished shoes, his nerves fighting. His excitement. My parents would be there too, proud and glowing, ready to play their part in the perfect picture. And me? I was still in the same apartment with peeling paint and humming pipes, my clothes piled in the corner, the smell of last night's fried food still lingering in the air. It felt like the world had split in two. Theirs was bright and full of promise, mine was dim and silent, a shadow that no one wanted to see. I thought about showing up anyway, walking into that church in whatever clothes I had, standing at the back and reminding them that I was family whether they liked it or not. But the thought died as quickly as it came. I could still hear my mother's voice from days before, soft but sharp. It might be better if you didn't come. Those words had settled into me like cement. To go would have been to fight against the truth they had already written, that I didn't belong. So I got dressed without purpose. Faded jeans, a t-shirt, sneakers scuffed from years of walking these streets. My reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror looked tired, older than I was. My eyes carried a weight no amount of sleep could fix. I splashed water on my face, but it did nothing to wash away the feeling of being erased. Outside, the block was already alive. Kids ran through the narrow alleys, their laughter bouncing off brick walls. A man pushed a cart of ice cream, the bells jingling as he called out. Music thumped from a parked car, bass rattling its doors. To anyone else, it was just another Saturday. But to me, it felt like the city was moving on without me, like joy belonged to everyone else. I walked with no direction, my hands stuffed deep in my pockets. I passed the corner store, the one with bulletproof glass that had watched me grow from a boy buying penny candy to a man counting change for bread. Inside, the shelves were stacked with cheap snacks, cold drinks, and the kind of food you buy when money is thin. A couple of teenagers lingered outside, nodding at me as I walked by. They didn't know today was different for me. To them, it was just another day on the block, but for me, every step felt like an echo of the celebration I wasn't part of. I imagined the church bells ringing, the bride walking down the aisle, the cameras flashing as my family smiled together. I imagined the tables laid out with food I couldn't taste, music I couldn't dance to, laughter I couldn't share. Every detail I pictured felt like a reminder that I had been written out of the story. The city felt heavy that day. I wandered past boarded-up houses, their windows shattered like broken promises. I walked by murals painted on brick walls, faces of neighbors lost too soon, names written in colors that tried to fight against fading. I passed the basketball court where kids shouted as the ball echoed against the pavement. I thought about how many hours I had spent there with my brother, sweating under the sun, laughing even when we had nothing. Now he was somewhere else, dressed in silk and flowers, while I stood in the same cracked concrete we grew up on. By the time the afternoon sun was high, I found myself sitting on the stoop of an abandoned building. The bricks were warm under me, the air thick with heat, and the smell of fried food drifting from a nearby kitchen. I sat there watching strangers walk by, their lives moving forward, their stories untouched by mine. Somewhere across town, vows were being exchanged. Applause filled the air, cameras clicked, champagne poured, and I sat in silence, chewing on the thought that I had been erased from that memory before it was even made. As the day stretched into evening, the sky turned shades of orange and pink. Streetlights buzzed to life, some flickering, some dead. I knew the wedding reception was alive now, music louder, plates stacked with food, laughter spilling into the night. I could almost hear it if I closed my eyes. But when I opened them, there was only the sound of sirens in the distance and the bark of a dog chained in a nearby yard. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up days before when my parents first told me I wasn't wanted. Instead, there was just a hollow space inside me, a quiet I couldn't shake. I realized then that this wasn't only about a wedding. It was about a lifetime of being in the background, of carrying the weight of struggle while others carried the spotlight. This day only made the truth impossible to ignore. When the night settled in, I walked back home through streets that looked the same as they always had. Trash cans overflowing, porch lights glowing weakly, neighbors arguing through open windows. Life didn't pause for my pain. It never had. And as I lay back in bed staring at the cracked ceiling once again, I knew something had changed. My brother had stepped into a new life, celebrated, surrounded. I had stepped deeper into silence, unseen, forgotten. That was the day I started to think that maybe disappearing wasn't just an idea. Maybe it was the only thing left to do. When I think about why my brother's wedding cut so deep, I realize it's because of the streets we came from. We grew up side by side in the same neighborhood, carrying the same struggles, eating the same meals made from whatever could stretch. To see him celebrated while I was asked to stay invisible, it felt like our shared past had been erased. But the streets don't forget, and neither do I. I was raised in a building that leaned tired against the skyline, its bricks worn down by decades of wind, rain, and lives like ours. The hallways smelled like fried food one moment, bleach the next. You could always hear something through the thin walls. A baby crying, a couple arguing, music too loud from a party that should have ended hours ago. The elevator worked only on some days, and when it didn't, I climbed stairwells littered with candy wrappers and names scratched into the paint. We didn't have much, but we had each other. My brother and I used to play on cracked sidewalks, racing bikes with chains that always slipped, making basketball hoops out of milk crates nailed to telephone poles. The court down the block was our second home. No nets on the rims, just metal, rings and pavement full of weeds. Still, we played until the sun dipped low and mothers leaned out windows calling their kids in. Those were the moments that felt like freedom. Food was never guaranteed, but somehow my mom made it stretch. Rice and beans, noodles with butter, fried bologna sandwiches, meals that might not have looked like much, but filled our stomachs. Enough to keep us moving. On good weeks, she'd bring home chicken wings from the corner spot, and the smell alone could make the whole building jealous. We'd eat at the small kitchen table, the three of us squeezed close, laughing, even when bills piled up in plain sight on the counter. The block was full of people who knew the same struggle. Miss Evelyn, selling plates of food from her kitchen window to pay rent. Mr. Charles, who told stories about the jobs that used to exist in factories long gone. The older kids, who looked like giants to us, posted on corners, always watching, always moving money and whispers in ways I didn't understand back then. Everybody was hustling in one way or another, trying to survive a system that seemed built to keep us stuck. Despite it all, there was beauty too. Summer nights when fire hydrants were cracked open, spraying water down the street while kids ran through screaming with joy. Cookouts that turned into block parties, music blasting old-school soul while people danced barefoot on the pavement. The barbershop, where men argued about basketball and politics with the same fire, clippers buzzing like background music. That neighborhood made me who I am. It taught me how to read people's faces, how to know when to stay quiet and when to speak up. It taught me to carry myself with strength even when I felt weak. It taught me to find pride in little things, new sneakers after months of saving, a good report card, a neighbor saying they were proud of you, and it gave me memories with my brother that I thought would always hold us together. Walking home from school with bags heavier than our bodies, laughing at jokes only we understood, sharing the last slice of pizza, even when we both wanted the whole thing, sleeping in the same room, whispering dreams about what we'd do when we finally got out. That's why the wedding hurt in ways words can't explain, because the streets had already demanded so much from us. They had taken friends too soon, forced us to grow up faster than we should, carved hunger into our bones. But through it all we had each other, or at least I thought we did. Now looking back, I realize those streets raised us differently. Maybe he carried them like a stepping stone, something to climb on and rise above. Maybe I carried them like chains wrapped around me, keeping me tied to everything we came from. And on that wedding day, it was clear which story my family wanted to tell. But I can't pretend the streets didn't raise me. They're in my blood, in the way I walk, in the way I see the world. Every crack in the sidewalk, every siren in the night, every laugh echoing down those hallways is a part of me. The streets gave me struggle, yes, but they also gave me strength. And no matter how far I try to run, I carry them with me, whether anyone else wants me to or not. Long before my brother's wedding, I had already started to fade from the picture. It didn't happen all at once. It was piece by piece, moment by moment, so slow that even I didn't see it clearly at first. But looking back, I can trace the outline of how it happened. I was the oldest, the one who carried the weight when our parents were working long hours or not around at all. I walked my brother to school, made sure he had something to eat when the fridge was bare, stood in front of him when trouble came our way on the block. For years, I thought that meant I had a place carved out in the family that couldn't be erased. I believed being the one who protected and carried meant I would always matter. But over time, I noticed how different the treatment became. At school, the differences showed up early. Teachers called him promising. They said he was focused, bright, respectful. They called me a problem, the kid who didn't pay attention, who had too much energy, who needed to try harder. It didn't matter that I was tired from helping at home or distracted by bills piling up on the kitchen counter. Nobody asked, nobody cared. My brother got encouragement. I got warnings. Neighbors praised him for staying out of trouble, for keeping his head down, for looking like he was going somewhere. When they looked at me, their faces held quiet caution, like I was already a risk, already a mistake waiting to happen. Even my parents, in small ways, started to shift. They bragged about his grades, his opportunities, his future. When it came to me, silence filled the space. It wasn't jealousy. I was proud of him. Every step he took forward felt like proof that at least one of us might make it out. I used to tell myself, if he wins, we all win. And I believed it. But pride and pain can live in the same body, and in mine they did. Because with every celebration of him, I felt myself being pushed further into the background, like the parts of our story that didn't fit the image were being cropped out. Family photos told the story better than words. In some, I was off to the side, half in the frame, half cut off. In others, I wasn't there at all, even though I had been standing just a few feet away when the picture was taken. Birthdays, graduations, cookouts. Over time, I stopped being asked to pose. I can still hear my mom's voice, "Let's get one of the graduate," or my dad saying, "Make sure your brother's in the middle." Small things, quiet things, but things that told me exactly where I stood. It was like they had already started to practice a version of life without me in it. At first, I tried harder. I showed up early, offered to help, tried to be useful. I set up chairs, carried heavy boxes, cleaned dishes while others celebrated. But no matter what I did, the spotlight was never mine. My brother got the center seat at the table, the front spot in the pictures, the proud speeches from our parents, and I got the task of cleaning up after. The message wasn't spoken out loud, but it was written in the small details. You don't belong in the story we want to tell. I remember one Christmas especially well. We didn't have much, but my parents had saved up to buy my brother a new pair of sneakers, the kind that everyone wanted, the kind kids at school bragged about. His face lit up when he pulled back the wrapping paper, eyes wide, mouth open, in pure joy. My dad even laughed, clapping him on the shoulder, saying, "Now that's a gift worth showing off." The whole room seemed to glow with him. I was happy for him, truly. I smiled, clapped, nodded like I was part of the celebration. But when it came to me, there was nothing but a sweater a size too small, wrapped in thin paper, no tag, no real thought. My mom said, "It'll keep you." Warm, her tone flat, distracted, already turned back toward my brother. I held it up, forced a smile, said thank you. Inside, though, the sweater felt heavier than bricks. It wasn't about the fabric. It was about what it meant. One son celebrated, the other tolerated. That night, after the food was eaten and the laughter faded, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to my brother's sneakers squeak against the floor as he tried them on again and again. I whispered to myself, maybe next year. But deep down I already knew next year would be the same and the year after that. Until one day I wasn't even in the room at all. Moments like that piled up over the years. He got the cheers, I got the silence. He got "we're proud of you." I got "do better." Slowly I started to feel like a shadow trailing behind. Him, always present but never really seen. And the more invisible I became, the harder it was to fight my way back into view. That's why the wedding wasn't just a single wound. It was the final cut in 1,000 small ones that came before. When my parents told me it would be better if I didn't show up, it wasn't a new idea. They had been saying it in 100 quiet ways for years. The wedding only made it official. The irony hit me hardest at night. How we had shared the same struggles, the same hunger, the same hand-me-down clothes. How I had carried him on my shoulders when he was too tired to walk home, split my share of food so he wouldn't go hungry, defended him when kids tried to test him. I thought those sacrifices meant something permanent, that they tied me to him in a way that couldn't be undone. But in the end, it was like none of that counted. Fading from the picture doesn't happen because you're weak. It happens because people stop seeing you, even when you're standing right there. And once they stop seeing you, you start to wonder if you're really there at all. That's what hurt the most, not just being left out, but starting to believe I was never meant to be included. That's what the wedding did to me. It wasn't just one day, it was the proof of what I had been feeling for years. Proof that the family I thought I belonged to had already written me out. And once you realize that, disappearing doesn't feel like running away. It feels like stepping into the role they already cast you in. Invisible. The night of my brother's wedding was the longest night of my life. Not because of what I did, but because of what I didn't do. I didn't show up. I didn't sit in the back pew of the church. I didn't stand outside the reception hall waiting for a chance to slip in unnoticed. I stayed away just like they asked. But staying away wasn't as simple as closing a door. It was like cutting a cord that had held me in place for years, and once it snapped, there was no pulling it back together. I remember lying on my bed that evening, staring at the ceiling like I had done 1,000 times before. The paint above me was cracked and peeling, shaped like rivers spreading across an old map. I thought about where they all were at that exact moment. My brother standing, tall in his suit, my parents smiling for pictures, my relatives eating, drinking, laughing. I thought about how my name wasn't on anyone's lips, how my face wasn't in a single photograph. It wasn't only sadness, it was something heavier. A hollow that opened wide inside me, swallowing everything. I had spent years fighting to stay in the picture, fighting to matter. And now I realized I was already gone in their eyes. Disappearing was only me catching up to the truth. I sat up, put on my sneakers and walked outside. The hallway smelled of damp carpet and someone's cooking, fried onions, maybe beans simmering in a pot. The air outside was cooler, carrying the sound of music from passing cars, laughter from neighbors on stoops, a baby crying somewhere in the distance. It was the same soundtrack I had always known, but that night it sounded different, like the world was saying goodbye without even noticing I was leaving. I walked without direction, just letting my feet carry me, past the corner store with its buzzing fluorescent light, past the basketball court where kids shouted under the dim glow of a single working lamp, past murals painted for friends who never made it past 18. Every step felt like I was saying goodbye, not to the block itself, but to the version of me that had always belonged to it. At one point, I stopped at the bridge that crossed over the highway. Cars rushed beneath me, headlights streaming like veins of light in the darkness. I leaned against the railing and thought about what it would mean to truly disappear, not just walking away for the night, not just skipping one family event, but stepping out of the story completely. No phone calls, no explanations, just silence. The thought scared me and comforted me at the same time. Scared me because it meant cutting ties with everything I had ever known. Comforted me because it meant no more waiting to be chosen, no more fighting to be seen. For the first time, the idea of leaving felt like freedom. I thought about my mom, about how she used to give me the bigger share of food when we were kids, even if it meant she went hungry. I thought about the way she smiled through tired eyes, pretending she wasn't starving while sliding her plate toward me. I thought about my dad, quiet and stern, who worked long hours that bent his back but somehow never bent his silence. He provided, yes, but when he looked at me, there was always a distance, a space between us that never closed. He saved his pride for my brother, as if he had only enough to give to one son, and I thought about my brother himself, about the nights we whispered dreams in the dark of our shared bedroom, how we used to plan escapes from the block, talking about the cars we'd drive, the houses we'd buy, the places we'd see. We promised each other we'd never forget where we came from, never forget each other. Back then, those promises felt stronger than blood. But now, standing in the echo of their wedding day without me, I realized those memories belonged to the past. The people in them weren't the same anymore. Maybe I wasn't either. By the time I walked back to the apartment, the decision had settled inside me like stone. I wasn't going to wait for another moment of rejection. I wasn't going to fight for a seat at a table where I was never wanted. I was done trying to hold a place in a family that had already erased me. This wasn't a burst of anger. It was a slow, heavy acceptance. I packed slowly, not because I had much to take, but because every item carried weight. A few shirts folded neatly, a pair of jeans worn thin at the knees, my sneakers scuffed from years of walking the same cracked sidewalks. And then the old photo I kept tucked away in a book, one of the rare pictures where I was actually in the frame, standing next to my brother, both of us smiling like the world hadn't divided us yet. It wasn't much, but it was mine, proof that I had once existed in their story. That night I didn't leave a note. I didn't knock on my parents' bedroom door. I didn't call my brother. I just stood for a moment in the dark living room, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound, the air heavy with everything unsaid, and then I walked out, the door closing behind me with a soft click that felt louder than any argument we had, ever had. That sound echoed in my chest as if it were final. On the street the night was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel both alone and alive. The air carried the smell of fried food from a late-night kitchen, the distant bass of music thumping from a car passing by, the sharp cry of sirens far away. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew it would be away from the block, from the family, from the version of me that kept waiting to be wanted. Each step felt heavier than the last, but also freer, as if the chains of expectation were loosening with every block I walked, and that's how disappearing began. Not with a plan, not with anger, not even with hope. It began with the simple truth that sometimes the only way to survive being invisible is to finally stop fighting for visibility, to step into the shadows not as a punishment, but as a choice, to claim them as your own and to start again in the silence they bring. Disappearing doesn't happen all at once. At first, it feels like stepping outside for air, like taking a walk to clear your head. But then the walk gets longer, the nights away stretch into weeks, and before you know it, silence becomes your only language. The first days after I left, I stayed in the city but far from the block. I slept on couches when I could, sometimes in shelters, sometimes nowhere at all. I blended into the background. Just another face people passed on crowded sidewalks. No one asked questions. No one cared where I came from. For the first time, being invisible didn't hurt. It protected me. But silence has its own weight. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake listening to traffic, the hum of streetlights, the occasional burst of laughter from strangers passing by. And in that quiet, memories returned. My brother's smile at family dinners, my mom's laugh when she managed to stretch food into a meal big enough for everyone. Even my father's stern voice, steady in its own way. They came back to me like ghosts, not cruel, not kind, just reminders of what I had left behind. I wondered if they noticed, if in the middle of my brother's new married life anyone asked where I had gone. Maybe they thought I was just sulking, that I'd come around eventually, or maybe they didn't mention me at all the same way. They had cropped me out of pictures for years. I'll never know because I never went back to ask. The world outside my family wasn't easy. The streets were still the streets, loud, restless, dangerous in quiet ways. Hunger didn't disappear. Bills didn't vanish. But something shifted inside me. For the first time, I stopped waiting for permission to exist. I stopped trying to squeeze myself into spaces where I was unwanted. My life was rough, but it was mine, not borrowed, not hidden. Over time, I built small routines, mornings with coffee from gas stations, afternoons spent searching for day work, evenings watching the city lights from rooftops. I learned the names of people who lived on the margins like me, people who carried their own stories of being pushed out, some by families, some by jobs, some by life itself. Each story was different, but the silence after was the same. The strange thing is, I never felt pure anger, not even toward my parents, not even toward my brother. Anger would have been easier. It burns fast. It gives you something to fight against. What I felt was emptiness, a hollow that stretched wider each day and then a slow kind of acceptance, like a wound that stops bleeding but never heals clean. It leaves a scar, one you can trace with your fingers when no one's watching. That scar was my reminder. I had been part of a family once, but they chose a picture where I didn't belong, and so I chose silence. In that silence, I learned how to live differently. I carried my memories like worn photographs, edges fading but never gone. Sometimes they comforted me, sometimes they cut deep. But they were mine, proof that I had been there, even if no one else wanted to remember. Years later, I sometimes imagine my brother's wedding photos. I see the smiles frozen in time, the raised glasses catching the light, the dance floor full of joy. I picture my parents glowing, proud of the son who made it, their faces soft in ways I rarely saw growing up. And in those images, I'm not there. At first, that thought felt like a knife. Now it feels like truth, the kind of truth you stop fighting because fighting doesn't change the picture. Disappearing didn't make me stronger. It didn't erase struggle. It didn't fill the fridge. It didn't fix the weight of the streets I grew up on. But it gave me something I never had before. Control. For once, I wasn't waiting for someone else to choose me, to make space for me to say I belonged. For once I decided where I stood, even if it was outside the frame. The silence after wasn't empty. It carried my breath, my steps, my choices. It was mine. And maybe that's the lesson in all of this. Sometimes the greatest pain isn't losing people. It's realizing the place you thought you held in their lives was never really yours. Sometimes survival isn't about fighting to get back into the picture, but about stepping away and making peace with the space you claim for yourself. That's what I did. I disappeared. Not because I wanted to vanish, not because I didn't care, but because being absent was the only way I could finally exist on my own terms. This is the story of a man raised in the projects, shaped by hunger, struggle, and resilience, who found himself erased from his own family's most important day. Told not to show up at his brother's wedding, he chose instead to disappear, not out of anger, but out of acceptance. In the silence after, he discovered the quiet power of taking control of his own life, even if it meant walking alone, even if it meant living forever outside the frame.